Nicholas sat at his desk, scrolling absent-mindedly through emails when his phone buzzed. It was Sophia. She rarely called during the day, usually preferring texts or waiting until they were both home. He smiled faintly, expecting a simple request or casual check-in. But her voice on the other end wasn't casual, it was distant, cold. "Nicholas," she began, her tone measured and deliberate, "we need to talk." The pit of his stomach churned, that dreaded phrase slicing through his routine like a jagged blade. He straightened in his chair, gripping the phone tighter. "What's going on, Sophia? Are you okay?" There was a pause, filled with the faint sounds of her breathing, as though she were mustering courage. Then she dropped the words he could never have anticipated. "I want a divorce." For a moment, the world around Nicholas blurred. The hum of his computer, the muted sounds of the office, everything fell away. He blinked, struggling to process. "A divorce?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she confirmed, firmer this time. Her voice was steady, as though she had rehearsed this conversation countless times in her mind. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and it's what I want." The air grew thick, oppressive. Nicholas's thoughts raced, his mind grappling with the sudden reality of her words. "Sophia, what are you talking about?" "We haven't even discussed any problems." "Because I can't do this anymore," she interrupted, her voice sharp but tinged with something else. "Guilt? Regret? I'm not happy, Nicholas. I haven't been happy for a long time." His heart clenched. "But we've been fine, haven't we? I mean, we had arguments, sure, but nothing serious. We can work on this, Sophia. Whatever it is, we can fix it." She sighed deeply, as though bearing the weight of a long-held secret. "No, Nicholas. This isn't something we can fix. I've been seeing someone else." The word struck like a thunderclap. His throat tightened, his chest constricted, and a bitter taste rose in his mouth. "Someone else," he repeated, his voice trembling. "Who?" Another pause, longer this time, before she answered. "Lucas." The name burned. Lucas, the actor she had been working with on her latest project, the man whose charm and effortless charisma had always made Nicholas feel small in his presence. A man who could command a room with a single smile. A man Nicholas now realized had stolen his wife. "You've been having an affair with Lucas?" he stated flatly, the words tasting like ash. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Sophia said hurriedly, her voice softer, as if that would lessen the blow. "But he makes me feel alive again, Nicholas. He makes me feel things I haven't felt in years. And I don't." Nicholas shot back, his voice rising, the pain morphing into anger. "Was I just some placeholder for you to pass the time until something better came along?" "That's not fair," Sophia snapped, but her tone lacked conviction. "You're a good man, Nicholas. You've always been good to me. But that's not enough anymore. I need more." He stood up abruptly, pacing the room, his hand gripping his hair as if to physically keep himself together. "You need more? So you throw away everything we've built, everything we've been through together? For what? For some fleeting excitement? For some fantasy?" Sophia's voice hardened. "This isn't a fantasy. It's real, Nicholas. I've made my decision." "Your decision," he spat bitterly, stopping to lean against the desk for support. "What about me? What about us? What about all the years I've spent loving you, supporting you, being there for you?" "I can't change how I feel," she said, her tone softening again, but it only fueled his frustration. "I didn't call to hurt you. I called because I want to be honest. You deserve that much." He laughed, but it was a harsh, hollow sound. "Honest? You want to talk about honesty now? After God knows how long you've been sneaking around behind my back?" There was no immediate response, and for a moment, he thought she might have hung up. But then she said, almost in a whisper, "I'm sorry, Nicholas. I really am." "Sorry," he repeated bitterly, shaking his head. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't erase what you've done." "I know," she admitted, her voice trembling now. "But I can't keep living a lie. This is what I need to do." The finality in her tone hit him harder than anything else. This wasn't a plea or a conversation, it was a statement. She had already moved on, emotionally if not physically. And Nicholas was left standing in the wreckage of what he thought was a solid marriage, blindsided and broken. "Do you even care about what this is doing to me?" he asked, his voice raw with pain. "Do you even care about the damage you're leaving behind?" "I care," she said, though it sounded more like a reflex than genuine emotion. "But staying in this marriage isn't fair to either of us. You deserve someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved." Her words, meant to console, only deepened the wound. He didn't want someone else. He wanted her, the woman who had been his partner, his confidant, his everything. "I can't do this right now," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't. I just can't." He ended the call before she could respond, collapsing into his chair as the weight of the conversation bore down on him. The tears came unbidden, hot and bitter, as the reality of Sophia's betrayal and the unraveling of his life hit him full force. For the first time in years, Nicholas felt utterly and completely alone. The days following Sophia's call were a blur for Nicholas. The sting of her betrayal refused to fade, clawing at him like an open wound. Every corner of their shared home felt suffocating, brimming with memories that now felt tainted. Each picture on the wall, each mug in the cabinet, whispered of a life he thought was solid, until it crumbled beneath him. And yet, something about Sophia's words gnawed at him. She had claimed the affair was recent, a whirlwind of emotion and passion that had just happened. But that explanation rang hollow. There were cracks in her story, inconsistencies that pricked at his already raw nerves. The more Nicholas turned it over in his mind, the more he began to suspect that her betrayal had deeper roots. One memory surfaced, unbidden, like a ghost in the fog. It was a late evening several months ago. He had returned home from work earlier than usual, weary from a day of meetings, only to spot Sophia outside. She was by the curb, climbing into an unfamiliar black sedan. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, maybe it was a friend's car or a rideshare. But what struck him now was her reaction when she noticed him. She froze for a split second, her hand on the door handle, before forcing a smile and offering a quick wave. Then she disappeared into the car without explanation. That night, she hadn't returned home until well past midnight. When he asked where she'd been, her answer had been casual but vague, something about dinner with colleagues and losing track of time. He had believed her then. Why wouldn't he? She was his wife, the woman he trusted implicitly. But now, the memory took on a sinister new light. He replayed the details in his mind, the stiffness in her body, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. It had been Lucas. He was sure of it now. That night was one of the first cracks in the facade she had so carefully maintained. Fueled by suspicion, Nicholas began piecing together fragments of their past, searching for the signs he had missed. Late-night texts she had brushed off as work-related, sudden, unexplained trips. A growing emotional distance he had chalked up to stress. It all painted a picture far more damning than Sophia's sanitized confession. As the days wore on, his questions multiplied, feeding his torment. Was their life together a lie? How long had Lucas been a shadow in their marriage? And how much of Sophia's love, if it had ever truly been love, had been reserved for him alone? The answers came from an unexpected source. One evening, as Nicholas stared blankly at his phone, contemplating the futility of calling Sophia to demand the truth, an unknown number lit up his screen. Reluctantly, he answered. "Hello. Nicholas?" A woman's voice, soft but firm, carried through the line. "This is Claire. Claire Morgan." The name didn't immediately register, but when she added Lucas's ex-wife, his pulse quickened. What could she possibly want? "I hope I'm not intruding," Claire continued, her tone cautious. "But I heard about what happened. I know Sophia left you for him." Nicholas's throat tightened, the humiliation flaring anew. "What do you want, Claire?" "I thought you deserved to know the truth," she said simply. "Lucas isn't who he pretends to be. He's a liar, a manipulator, and a serial cheater. Whatever Sophia thinks she has with him, it's not real." Nicholas hesitated, torn between his pride and his need for answers. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been where you are," she replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I wasted years of my life on that man, believing his lies, forgiving his betrayals. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. And I thought you might want to know. Sophia might not be the only one he's seeing. The words hit Nicholas like a sledgehammer. For a moment, he could only sit in stunned silence, the weight of Claire's revelation settling over him. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Do you have proof? Claire sighed. No, but I have stories. More than you'd believe. He has a pattern, Nicholas. He finds women who feel unfulfilled, convinces them he's the answer to everything they're missing, and then moves on as soon as he gets bored. That's how he trapped me, and it's how he trapped Sophia. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Claire's words gave shape to the gnawing doubts he hadn't been able to articulate. Lucas wasn't just a threat to his marriage, he was a predator, a man who thrived on breaking hearts and leaving destruction in his wake. Thank you for telling me, Nicholas said finally, his voice heavy. But I don't know what to do with this. That's up to you, Claire said. But if you ever need to talk, I'm here. And if you need any more dirt on Lucas, well, I've got plenty. When the call ended, Nicholas felt a strange mix of vindication and despair. He wasn't crazy. Sophia's affair with Lucas wasn't some sudden, accidental thing. It was calculated, deliberate. And the man she had chosen over him wasn't just unworthy, he was dangerous. The humiliation of it all burned in Nicholas's chest like acid. His wife had thrown away their life together for a man who didn't care about her, a man who was likely already lining up his next conquest. And she had left Nicholas to pick up the pieces, to suffer the shame of being cast aside. That night, Nicholas couldn't sleep. His mind churned with anger, regret, and a fierce, unrelenting pain. But beneath it all, a new resolve began to take shape. Sophia and Lucas had destroyed his world, but he wouldn't let them break him completely. They might have won the battle, but the war was far from over. The cold, hollow feeling that had settled in Nicholas's chest after Sophia's betrayal didn't dissipate. It calcified into something sharper, something determined. The conversation with Claire had been a turning point. If Lucas was as manipulative and deceitful as Claire claimed, Nicholas wouldn't sit idly by while his life was turned to ash. He was done grieving. Now he was preparing for war. The first step was cutting Sophia off financially. Though she hadn't moved out yet, she was spending less time at the house, coming and going like a ghost in the life they had shared. Nicholas contacted their bank first, freezing the joint accounts and shifting his direct deposits into an account in his name alone. Any credit cards they shared were canceled immediately. When the bank asked for a reason, he answered curtly, separation. Next, Nicholas contacted his lawyer, Evelyn Price, a sharp-witted woman with a reputation for winning messy divorces. Sitting across from her in her sleek office, Nicholas felt the weight of his shame pressing down on him as he explained the situation. So she left you for this, Lucas, Evelyn summarized, her voice clipped but not unkind. And you believe the affair has been ongoing for longer than she admits? Nicholas nodded, his jaw tight. I don't just believe it. I know it. I've started piecing together moments, lies she told, unexplained absences. And Claire Morgan, Lucas's ex-wife, says this is his pattern. He preys on women, and now Sophia's trapped in his web. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. If Lucas is as much of a manipulator as Claire says, there's a good chance he's done something shady, financially, professionally, or personally. If we can dig up evidence of misconduct, we might not just help you in the divorce. We could expose him and destroy his influence over Sophia. Nicholas clenched his fists. The thought of tearing down the man who had ruined his marriage filled him with grim satisfaction. What do you need from me? First, you need to protect yourself, Evelyn said firmly. Change the locks on your home. Make sure Sophia can't access your accounts, your property, or anything else she might use to hurt you. Second, we'll gather evidence. I'll handle the legal end, but you'll need to cooperate with Claire to collect as much as you can about Lucas, his past affairs, financial dealings, and anything else that paints him as the predator he is. That evening, Nicholas returned home and immediately called a locksmith. Watching the man replace the locks on the front door, Nicholas felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This was the home he and Sophia had built together, filled with memories of their life as a couple. Now, it was a fortress, a place to shield himself from the person he had once trusted most. The next step was contacting Claire. They met at a quiet coffee shop, away from prying eyes. Claire arrived looking composed but weary, her elegant features marred by a faint air of exhaustion. It was clear that Lucas had left his mark on her too. "I brought some things that might help," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photos, screenshots of messages, and a few legal documents. "These are from our divorce. He tried to hide assets, used emotional manipulation to wear me down during negotiations, and lied under oath. He's a professional liar, Nicholas. You need to be ready for that." Nicholas flipped through the folder, his stomach churning as he read the damning evidence. There were messages Lucas had sent to other women while still married to Claire, dripping with the same false charm he had likely used on Sophia. There were records of suspicious financial transactions, including a mysterious offshore account. "How did he get away with all this?" Nicholas asked, his voice low and bitter. "Because people like him are good at covering their tracks," Claire replied. "And because I didn't fight hard enough." "But you're not mean, Nicholas. You can stop him before he destroys someone else." Over the next few days, Nicholas and Claire worked tirelessly to build their case. Evelyn's legal team dug into Lucas's professional history, uncovering a string of questionable contracts and unpaid debts. Meanwhile, Claire provided a steady stream of information from her own experiences, painting a picture of a man who thrived on deceit and manipulation. Nicholas also began keeping meticulous records of his interactions with Sophia. He documented every text, every email, and every unexplained absence, determined to prove the extent of her infidelity. When Sophia noticed the financial changes and confronted him, her indignation only fueled his resolve. "You can't just cut me off like this," she snapped one evening, her arms crossed as she stood in the doorway of their kitchen. "I can, and I have," Nicholas replied coldly. "You walked out on our marriage, Sophia. Don't expect me to bankroll your new life with him." Her face flushed with anger, but there was a flicker of something else. Fear? Guilt? "You're being spiteful, Nicholas." "I'm protecting myself," he shot back. "Something I should have done the moment you got into that car with him." The accusation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Sophia didn't deny it. She simply turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Each confrontation with Sophia left Nicholas feeling raw, but it also strengthened his resolve. He wasn't the helpless victim she had painted him to be. He was fighting back. By the end of the second week, Nicholas's plan was in full motion. Evelyn had prepared the groundwork for divorce proceedings, armed with evidence of Sophia's infidelity. Claire's insights had proven invaluable, giving them a clear picture of Lucas's tactics. And Nicholas, for the first time in weeks, felt a glimmer of hope. But it wasn't just about winning the divorce or exposing Lucas. For Nicholas, this fight was about reclaiming his life, about standing up to the people who had tried to tear him down and proving that he was stronger than they realized. The battle wasn't over yet, but Nicholas was ready. And he wasn't fighting alone. Nicholas hadn't planned for it to unfold so publicly. His focus had been on gathering evidence for his legal case, protecting himself from the fallout of Sophia's betrayal, and exposing Lucas for the manipulative fraud he was. But when Evelyn suggested bringing in a journalist to help shine a light on Lucas's pattern of deceit, he had agreed cautiously, never imagining how quickly it would spiral into chaos. The journalist, Lisa Carter, was sharp, relentless, and exactly the kind of person needed for the task. Claire had connections in the media world, and she introduced Lisa to Nicholas during one of their clandestine planning sessions. Lisa had a reputation for digging deep and hitting hard, and the more Nicholas learned about Lucas's twisted history, the more he realized the world needed to know. "It's not just about me or Sophia," Nicholas told Lisa during their first meeting. "Lucas has done this to so many women. He uses them, manipulates them, and then moves on like nothing happened. If we can expose him, maybe we can stop him from doing it again." Lisa listened intently, her notepad filling with details as Nicholas and Claire recounted everything they had uncovered. The offshore accounts, the lies, the infidelity, it was all there, a tapestry of betrayal woven over years. By the time they were done, Lisa looked both intrigued and appalled. "This is bigger than I thought," she said, tapping her pen against the table. If I publish this, it's going to explode. Are you ready for that? Nicholas hesitated, but only for a moment. He ruined my life. I'm ready. The investigation moved swiftly after that. Lisa dove into Lucas's past with the kind of fervor that made her both respected and feared in the journalism world. She interviewed former partners, colleagues, and anyone else who had crossed paths with Lucas. Each story painted a damning picture of a man who had built his life on lies. There was Marissa, who described how Lucas had charmed his way into her life only to drain her savings for a business investment that turned out to be a scam. There was Lila, who spoke tearfully of how Lucas had promised her marriage, only to leave her when she discovered she couldn't have children. And then there was Claire, whose detailed account of their marriage, filled with emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and infidelity, formed the backbone of the article. When the story finally broke, it was like a bomb going off. The headline was unflinching: "The Serial Deceiver, Inside the Dark Secrets of Lucas Adler." The article was a masterclass in investigative journalism, laying bare every sordid detail of Lucas's life. It chronicled his rise to fame, his carefully curated image as a charming, talented actor, and the trail of broken lives he had left in his wake. Lisa had even managed to obtain financial records showing Lucas's attempts to hide money from Claire during their divorce, as well as testimonies from women who described how he had emotionally and financially exploited them. Within hours, the article went viral. Social media lit up with outrage, disbelief, and condemnation. Fans who had once adored Lucas turned on him viciously, flooding his profiles with angry comments. Major news outlets picked up the story, and Lucas's publicists scrambled to contain the damage, issuing a bland statement about misunderstandings and privacy. But the damage was done. Lucas's carefully constructed image was in shambles, his career teetering on the brink of collapse. For Nicholas, watching the fallout was both satisfying and surreal. This man, who had stolen his wife and dismantled his life, was finally facing consequences. But it wasn't just Lucas who was caught in the storm. Sophia's name appeared prominently in the article. While Lisa had been careful not to vilify her, it was impossible to ignore her connection to Lucas. She was the most recent in a long line of women who had fallen for his manipulations, and the public wasn't kind in their judgment. Nicholas saw it unfold in real time. Comment sections filled with vitriol, calling Sophia everything from naive to complicit. Photos of her with Lucas, taken at events and shared on social media, were circulated with scathing captions. Overnight, she went from being a private figure to a public spectacle, her reputation dragged through the mud alongside Lucas's. The humiliation was palpable. Nicholas received a call from Sophia one evening, her voice trembling with anger and desperation. "Did you do this?" she demanded, skipping any pretense of civility. "Do what?" Nicholas asked evenly, though he knew exactly what she meant. "Leak all this to the press. You've ruined my life, Nicholas." He couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "I ruined your life? You're the one who destroyed our marriage, Sophia. If you're upset that the world knows the truth about Lucas, maybe you should have thought about that before you climbed into his bed." Her silence on the other end was deafening. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, "I didn't think it would be like this." "What did you think it would be like?" Nicholas shot back. "That you'd run off with him and everything would be perfect? That no one would notice or care?" "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he was like this." "Of course you didn't," Nicholas said coldly. "Because he's a liar. Just like you." The line went dead, and Nicholas set his phone down with a mixture of triumph and sorrow. He had won this battle, but it didn't feel like a victory. The person he had once loved was now a stranger, a shadow of the woman he thought he knew. As the scandal continued to unravel, Lucas's career crumbled. Projects he had been attached to were abruptly cancelled. Brands distanced themselves from him, issuing public statements condemning his behavior. Former fans held protests outside his events, waving signs that read "fraud" and "justice for the victims." Sophia, meanwhile, retreated from the public eye. She stopped attending events, stopped posting on social media, and reportedly moved into a small apartment far from the city. Nicholas heard through mutual acquaintances that she and Lucas were no longer speaking, though he didn't care enough to verify it. For Nicholas, the chaos brought an unexpected sense of closure. He had been humiliated, betrayed, and left to pick up the pieces of his life. But now the tables had turned. Lucas and Sophia were the ones facing the judgment of the world, their lives laid bare for all to see. And Nicholas? He was ready to move forward, free from the shadows of their betrayal. Nicholas had almost begun to feel normal again. It had been weeks since the scandal around Lucas erupted, and with every passing day, the sting of Sophia's betrayal faded slightly. The divorce proceedings were in motion, and Evelyn had assured him that the prenuptial agreement would protect his assets. His life wasn't fully back to where it had been, but for the first time in months, he felt like he could see the horizon. That fragile sense of peace shattered the moment Sophia showed up at his doorstep. It was late in the afternoon when he heard the doorbell. He wasn't expecting anyone, but when he opened the door, there she stood. She looked smaller than he remembered, her once carefully maintained appearance undone. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and her eyes were puffy and red. She clutched her bag tightly, her fingers trembling slightly. "Nicholas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her visit. His first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but instead he crossed his arms and leaned against the frame. "What do you want, Sophia?" She swallowed hard, glancing down as though gathering her thoughts. I need to explain. I need you to understand why. Why you destroyed our marriage," he interrupted, his voice cold. "Why you lied to me for months. Why you threw away everything we had for someone who couldn't care less about you. Please, go ahead." Sophia winced at his words, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she began, her voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you, Nicholas. You have to believe me." He laughed bitterly. "I have to believe you? After everything you've done, you still think you have the right to ask that of me?" She looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "It wasn't about you, Nicholas. I was lost. I felt trapped in our marriage, like I wasn't myself anymore. Lucas made me feel—" "Don't," Nicholas snapped, his voice rising. "Don't you dare say his name to me. Do you think I care how he made you feel? Do you think I want to hear how you justified betraying me?" "I'm not trying to justify it," Sophia said quickly, her voice desperate. "I'm just trying to explain. I wasn't happy, and I didn't know how to tell you. And then Lucas came along and he made me feel alive." Nicholas cut her off, the venom in his tone unmistakable. "You've used that line before, Sophia. Do you even realize how pathetic it sounds? You let some con man feed you empty promises, and now you're standing here asking for my understanding? You disgust me." Her face crumpled at his words, a sob escaping her lips. "Please, Nicholas. I know I made mistakes, but Mistakes," he said sharply, his voice dripping with incredulity. "Cheating isn't a mistake, Sophia. It's a choice. And you didn't just choose to betray me. You chose to lie, to humiliate me, and to throw away everything we built together. That wasn't a mistake. That was who you are." She shook her head frantically, her tears spilling over. "No, that's not who I am. I was weak, Nicholas. I was stupid. But I'm not that person anymore. I'm trying to make things right." "Make things right?" Nicholas echoed, his voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? You didn't come here to make things right. You came here because your perfect little life with Lucas fell apart, and now you have nowhere else to go. You don't care about me. You care about saving yourself." Sophia flinched as though he had struck her, her sobs intensifying. "That's not true," she insisted weakly. "I care about you. I still love you." Nicholas froze, her words hitting him like a slap. For a brief moment, he couldn't speak, the weight of her confession sinking in. Then, slowly, he shook his head, his voice low and steady. "You don't love me, Sophia," he said firmly. "If you ever did, you wouldn't have done what you did. Love isn't something you toss aside when it's inconvenient. Love doesn't destroy. And you destroyed everything." She reached out as though to touch his arm, but he stepped back, the movement sharp and final. "Nicholas, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm begging you. Give me another chance. Let me prove that I can be better, that I can. No, he said flatly, cutting her off. This isn't up for discussion. Our marriage is over, Sophia. It's been over since the moment you decided he was worth more than me. Her sobs turned into wails, her knees buckling as she sank to the porch. For a moment, Nicholas felt a pang of pity, but he quickly smothered it. This was the woman who had lied to his face, who had betrayed him without a second thought. She didn't deserve his sympathy. You should go, he said, his tone devoid of emotion. There's nothing left for you here. She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face twisted with despair. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. I have nothing, Nicholas. I've lost everything. That's not my problem, he said coldly. You made your bed, Sophia. Now lie in it. She sobbed harder, but Nicholas didn't waver. Without another word, he stepped back inside and shut the door firmly behind him. The sound of her cries on the other side was muffled but not entirely gone, and he stood there for a moment, leaning against the door as the weight of the encounter settled over him. When the cries eventually faded, he knew she had left. Slowly, he returned to the living room and sat down, staring at the divorce papers that Evelyn had prepared. The prenuptial agreement was airtight, ensuring that Sophia would leave the marriage with only what she had brought into it. Nicholas had been careful when they first married, and now, that caution was his saving grace. He signed the papers with a steady hand, each stroke of the pen feeling like another step toward freedom. This was the final chapter of their story, and as painful as it was, he felt a sense of closure. Sophia was no longer his responsibility. Her choices, her failures, her destruction, they were hers alone to bear. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Nicholas felt like he could finally move on.